Okay. Thanks. Thank you. Then we move to the last speaker before the lunch break. That will be Jaap, Gordijn, one of the co-organizers of this conference. He talks about digital innovation ecosystems, but the point that is related to the subject matter of this session is that he will talk about the fairness and how to achieve that of decentralized innovation ecosystems. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Hans. Okay, thank you. I am very much aware that I'm between you and the lunch, which they just brought in here. So I'm quite hungry, so I try to speed up a bit. This is very much ongoing research that I'm going to talk about right now, and it's about decentralized innovation ecosystems and how we can realize that perhaps or perhaps not with blockchain technology. First, some background about ecosystems and platforms. An ecosystem we consider as a group of actors, usually economic actors, that depend on each other for their economic survival and well-being. And probably you know all Apple, specifically the iOS ecosystem with their Play Store and so on. But there are many others of these ecosystems. And by the way, if I talk about ecosystems, it's are always business ecosystems. And in most cases, because we are at the end of the day computer scientists over here, digital business ecosystems. There are also biological ecosystems, and there are some parallels, but there also are some major differences. So Apple is very well known, but for instance, we have done quite a lot in the music industry where it's less centralized. So there are many record companies, right societies who have to clear intellectual property rights and so on. And also in the automobile industry you find a very important ecosystem. We all know that many car manufacturers have to deal with shortage in computer chips. And here you see really the essential of ecosystems, namely that they can't use cars anymore if those chips are not provided by Samsung or Intel or whatsoever. And so that immediately shows why an ecosystem point of view is important. Car manufacturers cannot do their work, cannot produce their products without the help of others. Related to ecosystems are platforms. And the first thing you have to understand is that basically every platform is an ecosystem. So iOS, which I mentioned before, Apple and Android, and there are lots of more. Uber, Airbnb, and so on. They are all platforms because they provide an infrastructure for others in the ecosystem. And so the Android operating system of Google provides, or is basically an infrastructure for app developers to sell their apps to, at the end of the day, end users. The same holds for the iOS from Apple. So it's an infrastructure, but it's also an ecosystem. And these actors can, so a platform can use also complementers. These are basically roughly seen the users of the ecosystem. There are two functions that digital platforms can provide, and in that sense also ecosystems. Abstraction, which means that an ecosystem plays a layer on top of where other users, other actors can define useful services. For instance, the Linux operating system is an example, again, Android and so on, game platforms too. And there are more interaction-oriented platforms, and Uber and Airbnb and those types of platforms are examples of that. They try to create interaction on the one hand between people who want to move from A to B, and on the other hand taxi drivers, or in the case of Airbnb, people who want to stay a night here in Amsterdam, and on the other hand homeowners who rent their, who offer basically a room or something like that to those travelers. So abstraction and interaction. Now, These are a few examples. So Google is here the platform provider, so basically providing the Android operating system. But below them there are also ecosystems. For instance, to produce hardware. You can buy the Android phones. Well, Google has its own Android phone, of course, but there are many other hardware vendors specifically who do that. And the other side, at the application level, there are also platforms. So Facebook, we all know, is a platform because, and basically the interaction platform, because it brings together not people, as you might think, but users like us and advertisers, right? So this is an example. There is also the Netflix platform. This is yet another example where Netflix is basically the platform, and they have to deal with lots of parties, people who, or companies who have intellectual copyright on movies or radio, television shows, and so on. And there is also competition, for instance, HBO and many other streaming providers that you have today, or Disney, for example, too. So these are all examples of platforms, and well, I think many of us are using one or more of these platforms. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to avoid Google. It's very well possible to avoid Facebook because I don't have a Facebook account. So this is simply the scientific evidence that you can avoid Facebook. And I see some other people not here in the room, so apparently I'm not the only one. But still, I think Facebook has something like 3 or 4 million users, which is roughly half of the world population. So not everyone agrees with it. So what's the problem? Well, this is the problem. This is the ecosystem of Amazon. Probably one of the largest digital ecosystems I know. And we really have tried to understand all the ecosystems because Amazon is involved in many ecosystems. We really have to try to understand the ecosystem of Amazon. And every time, or when we thought we are finished now, we discovered something else that Jeff Bezos launched or already launched many years ago. So this is virtually undoable to even draw the picture of the Amazon ecosystem. And so this is, there are, let's say, many important things shown here in this picture. For example, AWS, which is the virtual server service of Amazon. They earn most of the money with that, so that's clearly an important one. We all know Amazon, of course, from buying books and other products that they have. They for 1 year now they opened also a presence in the Netherlands, simply with the aim to destroy all other web shops that we have here in the Netherlands. So Amazon is a very big player. And you can see that by this picture, and they're not alone. This is also, but the same problem, a picture of WeChat. It's also very big, not complete, and basically their ambition is very simple. They want to be present everywhere in your life. Also, Google has that same intention. This is the Facebook ecosystem, also very difficult to, first of all, to understand what there is. This is basically the core where you have users, no, not like me, but others who have a Facebook account. They are impolitely called ad consumers because they have to view ads, and in return for that, they give their privacy information away. But they are ad viewers, and on the one hand, and on the other end of the ecosystem, there are of course companies who want to advertise and have to pay Facebook for that, and Google does precisely the same. But this ecosystem is not really complete because, well, I think 1 year ago or 1.5 years ago, Facebook launched the Libra initiative, which is well, they claimed it was a blockchain enabled currency, specifically for what I call the unbanked. So for people who don't have a bank account, and in most of the cases, these people live in Africa or the global south countries. We really in depth studied this whole liberal business model that they developed, and it's really very good for Mark Zuckerberg and his dear friends, but not so good for people in the global south. So it again shows how big these ecosystems are today. Well, there is a pattern that you can observe here. I deliberately showed a few of these ecosystems are in fact platforms and more precisely centralized platforms, meaning that there is one dominant party, Facebook, Google, Netflix, and so on, Airbnb, Uber, who drive these ecosystems. They take all important decisions by themselves, and users, well, can only do one thing, namely follow. What you see quite often is that those centralized ecosystems have very, very high investments up front. First of all, to create a market, and then after that, to create a monopoly. So what Uber, for example, did was to subsidize taxi rides just after they started up. They simply paid taxi drivers an amount of money just to create a market. So, and if you look, for instance, at a company like Netflix, Netflix pays an awful amount of money for creating content, so movies in practice. And it's still very doubtful if Netflix will ever be financially sustainable because of these huge investments. And now you see that they have really serious competition from Walt Disney, for example. So it's very difficult for them to establish the monopoly. But that's what all these platforms want. They want to be become the only party, that the dominant party that offers the service, and the same holds for Amazon. So usually what they do, and that's also the policy of Amazon in many countries, that first they offer products for dumb prices, so to push away the competition, and once they are the only one left, they increase prices substantially. And so that's what happens. So it leads to very high profit margins, more than 30% is not unusual, for example, for Uber. But it leads also to what we call unfair treatment of the others in the ecosystem. So the other parties, apart from the centralized party. So probably you have all seen in the newspaper many articles about how Amazon treats their employees. That's really problematic, and even in the US, they discourage any form of unionization. And Uber is more or less similar, but the wages are very low for drivers. There are lawsuits now against Uber that it's not very reasonable, and so on. In the Netherlands, we had a scandal we had with Booking.com. We had, as many other countries, subsidy program for Corona, and Booking.com used quite heavily these subsidy schemes, but at the same time paid their top managers, I believe, 20 or 50 million euros bonus. So basically, half of the subsidy that was obtained from the government was paid out to the top management. And Facebook, well, there are so many scandals about that. I don't want to elaborate on that.
You have only 5 minutes.
Yeah. So only 5 minutes. So what is the point here? The point is that decentralized ecosystems really lead to unfair treatment of many parties in the system, and that's from a societal perspective we think not desirable. But as a society, we should not want to have that. So there is a need for fairness, and the assumption that we have is that this fairness happens or can only happen if there is fair governance. right? So governance means who controls the ecosystem, and in decentralized ecosystems and platforms, there's only one party controlling the ecosystem, and you take it and so on. So fairness should be based on fair governance, and we think that fair governance can be achieved by so-called decentralized governance. So not to allow one party to take the most important decisions, but to make it more a democratic process or whatsoever. So I will skip a few slides because I want finally to say something on blockchain technology. What does blockchain technology has to do with all this? Well, blockchain technology is basically a technical solution to do this decentralization properly. Blockchain works as follows. You can imagine that we have a table. So this is the table that the bank can maintain with account numbers that we all have and transactions that we do. So at the left you see that I pay 100 euros, and at the right you see the bank account of the person to who I pay, and he receives this 100 euros. And what happens is, if I am user A at the left and I want to pay user B at the right, I have to give my bank the order to do so, and my bank transfers it to the bank of the receiver, and receivers get the money at the end of the day. So this is again an ecosystem with not a fully centralized ecosystem, but on the other hand, in the Netherlands there are I think 4 or 5 major banks, so it's also not a very decentralized system. So still banks have a huge power here. And the blockchain works as follows. There are no banks anymore. Blockchain and specifically Bitcoin is really pushed by, in America, by the Tea Party, the Libertarian Party. They find everything that smells to government awful. So everything that has to do with centralization or government or related institutions should disappear, and that's why they have presented this. And here, basically, I pay directly, so I'm user A, I pay directly to user B without any intermediate party. And the point is, of course, here that how is this solved? Well, because the role of the centralized party was to keep the administration, to keep this stable. And what happens with blockchain is that we all keep it stable, right? So there is no centralized table anymore, but we keep all these, all the users keep the table of the transactions. And the problem here is that, of course, these tables should be consistent. Because if I would cheat here, I would not decrease this 100 euro from my bank account, but only increase it at user B account, and then I committed fraud. And we want to prevent that. And how to do that is beyond the scope of this talk, but there are solutions for that. Now, why is blockchain technology then a solution for fair ecosystems? Well, first of all, it avoids any intermediate centralized party. And we know that these intermediate and even worse centralized parties can take control, and they have means to do that. That's clearly demonstrated by parties like Airbnb, Netflix, Uber, and so on. And they start with low prices, but they increase their prices significantly once they have the monopoly. So you don't want to have those situations because they can disrupt the ecosystem. They can cause result in an ecosystem that you don't want to have. So you need a decentralized solution for that, and blockchain can provide that. And now we are really close to the lunch. So what should happen, I think, to create these fair ecosystems? Well, if you look specifically at the European community, there's a policy of fining, basically. Yeah? So what happens is that Google or Amazon or all these big US firms that are out there get every now and then a fine, which is a couple of million euros. This sounds a lot, but for those enterprises, it's not that much, so they are very happy to pay that. What happens is that on a policy level in the EU, actually, we fine those companies. Perhaps an additional strategy could be to stimulate decentralized ecosystems. My vision is that the European Union should become the leader for decentralized ecosystems. The US is clearly the leader of centralized ecosystems, and the European Union should do it precisely the other way around, in my belief. And you need software for that, you need decentralized governance for that, you need to know how to do decentralized governance. That's not very easy in practice, because quite easily you come up with all kinds of voting schemes which may work or may not work. And blockchain can be used for that because it's a decentralized technology to solve these types of issues. There are many technical research issues here. Well, they are nice for computer scientists, but I don't want to elaborate too much on that right now. What is needed, let's say, from a more ecosystem perspective, is that we need so-called on-chain governance. We need to support the decentralized governance processes in the blockchain itself. And if you, for instance, look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin advertises itself as a decentralized technology, and Ethereum does the same, by the way. But if you look how their governance processes look like, so who decides about the Bitcoin protocol and who decides about the Ethereum protocol, it's not that decentralized at all. Ethereum is actually very much centralized in terms of governance, so there's still a lot to do there. And standardization lacks it all. So basically what you want to have is a sort of a structured period language for blockchain as we have for databases. There are lots of these blockchain platforms out there today. They cannot talk with each other yet. So standardization is here important. But the main point is we should stimulate decentralized ecosystem in Europe. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. This is Michael speaking.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Am I audible?
I think I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So my question, Jaap, is thanks for a very interesting talk. And my question is this one. How do we avoid that when we move, let's say, to a decentralized blockchain solution, that the ones who have the technology, for example, in a low resource environment or in a poor country, that the ones who have the technology and have the knowledge become the new leaders, let's say?
Yeah, well, this is a very big problem. That's actually precisely what happens with the Bitcoin. So with Bitcoin, you have 10,000 or perhaps even 50,000, I don't know precisely now, who form the network, and basically that's very easy because you download the software, you start the software, and it works. The real question on the table is who decides about the protocol that the software uses and behavior of this software. And for that, they have a process, the so-called Bitcoin improvement proposals. But there are only, let's say, I guess, 100 people who participate in that and understand what happens. So, yeah, if you look what happens in practice, those 100 people decide. That's not what you want. What you see in blockchain is that on the one hand, it's let's say decentralized or distributed computing, and that gives a very technical bias to the topic, and also how it is worked out in practice. What should happen is that you should be able to specify the governance processes and on a much more, let's say, clear level for end users. And so in blockchain, we have smart contracts, and a contract in computer science means something completely different than a contract in let's say, for legal people. And I think that to arrive at those decentralized ecosystems, the interpretation of contracts should be much more biased towards the legal interpretation than to the science interpretation, because that's basically how we use to express business contracts. But there's a lot to do there. Maybe bringing it to the higher level in terms of businesses, in terms of legal issues, in terms of policies and so on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jaap. Other questions? Final question. If not, so I think you make a important distinction between the nature of a technology and its governance. I think that's one of the key points. So you can have, and what you see is you can have a decentralized technology that is governed in a centralized way. You see that the blockchain.
Yeah, that happens right now, basically.
Yeah. That's what is happening right now. And that's also one of the issues of Tim Berners-Lee, that his decentralized web idea has been turned into a centralized network.
So my point is that the claim that, well, for blockchain, there are at least something like 100 people who decide that, but for Ethereum, it's less. But still, those platforms make the claim that they are decentralized, whereas if you look at the government, they are not really decentralized at all. And
but then they are confusing the technical nature with the governance nature. Okay, thank you very much. We stop for a lunch break. We reconvene at 1:30, 1:30.